Welcome to another Chapter podcast with your hosts, Claire and Rebecca. Welcome to Season 3, Chapter 4 of Another Chapter podcast. This week, we're joined by Elaine, who is a well-known bookstagrammer on Instagram, better known to many as Elaine and the Books. Elaine is the host of the banned Books Buddy Reads and the Stephen King book club entitled We All Float, and regularly hosts a Feel Good Friday feature on her stories, something that always puts a smile on our faces. Elaine has an unapologetic grow for Andrew Scott and Harry Styles, and we are here for it. So Elaine, welcome along.
Thank you very much. That's such a good bio. I couldn't have written better, Claire. Thank you.
Is there anything there that people that might not know you might want to add to it?
No, I think that's it. And I suppose just that it's, what I aim for it to be is just a place that makes people happy, whether it's talking about books or talking about something in pop culture or, Feel Good Friday or Harry Styles in very little clothing on stage. That's it's just to make people happy, spread the joy,
I love that feature.
Yeah, I think my favorite one is what's his second name now? Tom.
Oh,
Hiddleston dancing. Yeah, it genuinely brings me joy on a Friday.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the very popular one. And actually, if I didn't share that on a Friday, I do get the messages saying, "Where is it?" And it's it's something about the dance. It's the hips, but it's his smile as well. I think he has this really cheeky smile, but I think people just look forward to on a Friday. They like to see it. And I think we're definitely responsible for most of those views on TikTok. I think, we're ramping up the numbers there every Friday.
I love it.
How bad? Just to start from the start, I suppose, Elaine, like you were on Bookstagram well before myself or Claire, and you have quite an established following on Bookstagram now. So how did it all start? Where did Elaine and the Books come from, and where did it all begin?
Well, I suppose it's important to say that I've always liked having a creative space. It wasn't always in books, but I did English literature as part of my degree in college, and that always kind of satisfied, the book side and the creative side through college. And then when I left college, I kind of, once I started working, I didn't really have that creative space. So I actually started with a music blog. And I think that's common for Bookstagram, that a lot of people came from, blogs. But my blog was a music blog because they were the two early loves of my life, was music and books. And my blog was me reviewing albums, reviewing books about music, and then speaking to or interviewing music acts around Ireland. So I used to go to gigs, review the gigs, take photos at gigs, and then, share an interview with the artist afterwards, or the band. So that's kind of where it started. And it was mostly around Limerick. So I used to spend a lot of time in Dolan's Warehouse for anybody that knows it. And so that's where it started. But it did fulfill that kind of creative space. And then it just fell by the wayside because I got a new job. I work in UL, and the job I got at the time involved a lot of travel, and it was just really busy. So that side of my life where I had time to go to gigs and do what I was doing, it kind of, it just wasn't there anymore at the time. So it fell away. And then what happened was I had kids, and both of my kids were really small. This was about a year before COVID. And I'm going to make myself sound really glamorous here, but as part of work, I went to a TED conference in Palm Springs.
Wow.
That's the most glamorous thing I've ever done now. I've done nothing like that since, just in case anyone thinks here that I've notions. But I went to that TED conference, and I was diagnosed with pneumonia in the medical tent at the TED conference. So that's how I roll. I mean, you go to something glam like that and you end up in the medical tent. But when I came home, I ended up being out of work for a couple of months, and I just really missed having that space. So I then started my Bookstagram account. I didn't know it was called Bookstagram. In fact, I thought I invented Bookstagram. So I had this notion in my head that I would start a new Instagram account and remove it from my personal one. And I know a lot of people that you've interviewed have said that as well. I did feel like I was boring people on my personal account with the book reviews. So I said, oh, what if I actually created a dedicated Instagram account and I would share a picture of a book and then put the review in the text. And I was like, God, I've really done something amazing here. So at the time, there wasn't I didn't think there was a lot of people in Ireland doing the same thing. So I started connecting with all these UK bookstagrammers. So my first friends on Bookstagram were a lot of bookstagrammers in the UK. And it was brilliant. We were doing like read-alongs, we were doing book swaps, we were sending each other books. And then slowly I started finding people in Ireland when COVID hit and more people started doing it. And when I found someone from Ireland, it was like, oh my God, you're Irish. And then it started to become, oh my God, you're from Limerick or you're from Clare, where I'm living now. I'm from Limerick, but now living in Clare. And then it got smaller and smaller. And I started meeting more people from my county, you guys. I think one of the first people I met was Sharon Levy. And I love Sharon. I love her account. And actually, in fact, the account that Sharon has now, Sharon Read This, that's the account I aspire to have, where she has this brilliant setup where she posts a picture of a book and the review is underneath it. You know what you're getting. That's what I had kind of aimed to do. And that's how I kind of I found the Irish girls and you guys then. But I did think for a while I'd invented it. I mean, I was just absolutely fooling myself, really. I actually think I went back and even deleted some of my earlier posts because when I first came on board and really thought I was the only one doing it, some of my first posts, when I look back on them, were just, I couldn't even read them. I just deleted them. They were so bad. Like I came at it from the perspective of, being this really profound reviewer, whereas that's not me at all. I came at it with my kind of English literature hat on and was like, oh, I really need to write this profound review. Whereas now, I kind of share my opinions on books in a very straight way. And, like I don't go for those big kind of, Guardian reviews anymore that I was doing. So I went and deleted a lot of the early ones. But I think it's meeting people that made my account better as well. I think, first of all, it was just going to be this space where I brain farted all of these thoughts about books. But it's when I started meeting other people and connecting to them and connecting with them, and especially the girls in Ireland and all of you guys, that's, I think, what made it more enjoyable for me. At the start, it was literally just a place to put my thoughts because I had nowhere else to put them,
And the evolution of it from something that was so unusual, and like that's only 4 years ago, 5 years ago probably, to something that all of us take so for granted now. I think we'd all find it so difficult not to be on Bookstagram and not to have that community. Like the community, like myself and Claire were only talking about something similar earlier. The community from reading books, and actually Claire put it in a really lovely way that reading is actually by its nature a very solo thing. It's a very individual thing. But then you can actually have this amazing community out of being a reader, which is what makes it really special.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And like you said, like I'm a bit of a hermit as well. And, I found it very hard to come out of COVID because I loved the pandemic. Like I actually really liked that time because it gave me an excuse to go nowhere and do nothing. And reading, you're right there. Reading can be such a lonely experience, and having that forum to go on afterwards and talk about a book that you've just read, I think, is amazing. And everything that's come out of it, like the book clubs, the buddy reads, all of that has been fantastic. And actually that's my favorite thing about Bookstagram is the people behind it. And there's so much that goes on behind it that you don't see on my account. The DMs, like I'm talking to people in my DMs all day long, and they're not just Bookstagrammers, they're other women, that are reading books that either I'm recommending or they'll recommend books to me. We're talking about them, and they don't have the same forum to share their thoughts, but still we're talking all the time. So there's people that I'm very publicly close to, obviously because they're Bookstagrammers, and then there's other people behind the scenes who I've got great friendships with and talk to them, every single week, and that's my favourite part of it.
That's gorgeous, isn't it? Because realistically, like that's why we stick around. I know it's lovely to have the place to put your thoughts and to, as you say, like brain fart and let it out, but it is the people before anything else. And I think for me, when I was younger, everyone was like, oh, reading, like, it's a very solo thing, but I definitely think that it's so enhanced when you've got your community of people to discuss it with and to just spend time embracing it as a hobby, I suppose. Like, we've had lovely meetups and trips and everything, and so it's just it's evolved from posting a book review, as you say. Like, it's something far more than that, which is really, really lovely. I did not know that like Bookstagram in Ireland kind of only started just before the pandemic. I thought I was so late to the party when I decided to join.
Yeah, well, that's what I assume. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who are doing it much longer, but I think the pandemic very much brought it to the forefront. The same as banana bread. I suppose everybody was always baking banana bread, but when they bake en masse, it becomes this bigger thing. But I think that's a great point that you've made about reading. And I think when I was younger, I felt growing up, and I don't know if you guys feel the same, but I always felt that being the book nerd always kind of set you apart from other people. Like, it's like, I mean, finally, I'm 41, and finally I feel like, I've kind of found my tribe. I know that sounds cheesy. And that, I actually have a space where, I kind of belong, and I found, a niche where I fit. But growing up, when you're known as the bookworm, and there was plenty of other things I was interested in as well, but reading was always it for me. I mean, from a very young age. And, I was that child that every night going to bed, I was under a duvet and I either had a book and a torch, or I had like my Fisher-Price tape recorder with, do you guys remember those like early audiobooks for kids, and used to get them for free with the magazine subscription? Do you ever remember those? And I used to be like huddling under the covers with my Fisher-Price tape recorder, a little brown one with a handle. And my father used to have to come in every night and say, turn it off and put it away and go to sleep. And, I wanted to hang out in the library. Like, for anyone that grew up in Limerick and knows the Granary Library, the Granary building is this beautiful building in Limerick. And it's actually it was home of Doc's nightclub as well. So lots of people will know it. But that was my childcare. Like, the librarians in the Granary Library were my childcare. My mother and father both worked all my life, and myself and my sisters used to walk in there after school, and we used to sit in the library after school and do our homework. And I feel like those librarians kind of looked after me a bit. But reading is always a hobby that wasn't, I suppose it wasn't as well recognised as sport when I was growing up, and you were labelled a nerd or the bookworm, and it just wasn't as celebrated, I suppose, as other hobbies. So it's lovely as an adult to kind of have it be celebrated now, and for books to be more celebrated, even with our own kids. Like, seeing people, take their kids to library, getting involved in Summer Stars. Like, reading is so much more celebrated now, I think, for us and, for young people as well. And it's lovely to see.
Only the other week I was in our local library, which actually just reopened in a new building, and I thought there was loads of kids in after school, and they were all just there independently, but they were all like having a little chat, and some of them had books and some of them were doing homework, and I was like, it's so fabulous. Like, you'd see that meme online where it's kind of sharing the thought that the library is one of the few places in the world now where you can go in and sit in there without any expectation of spending money or doing anything besides staying relatively quiet. Like, that's pretty much the only requirement when you're in a library. And it was so lovely to see so many kids in our local library after school. Even now, because I would have been like you, I would have been in and out of the library like every week getting my books and stuff. And it was it's one of my core memories growing up, like that, those trips to the library. So you obviously were always a reader, so Elaine, like, is there any books in particular that kind of, I suppose, stand out to you as being huge memories from your childhood?
Yeah, I think like, I do have one memory that I recall all the time when it comes to reading, and that's I think I was about 8. Now, it's around 7 or 8, but now I'm looking at my kids. My kids are 7 and 8 at the moment, and I'm kind of looking at them going, God, was I that age reading novels? But I do think I was a very early reader, and my dad used to give us pocket money every Friday. And we used to go into town with my mother, and we were allowed to spend our pocket money. And every week I used to get a book. And the first book I remember buying for myself was George's Marvellous Medicine. And look, I'm sure a lot of people, Roald Dahl will stand out for them. But it was the first book that I bought myself with my own money, and I brought it home. And I remember sitting up, there's all of these deep windowsills in my parents' house, and I sat up on the one next to the staircase and I read it, and I didn't put my head up until I finished the whole thing. And I remember just being amazed at that book, because the imagination of Roald Dahl, the words in George's Marvellous Medicine, the silliness of it, the humour in it. It was the first book, I think, that made me laugh. The first book that I understood the humour in and had a reaction to. And after that, every Friday I wanted to spend my pocket money on books. And going into the library as well, I found all of the same books that a lot of people can relate to. Like, I would have read all of Enid Blyton, The Babysitter's Club. I would have moved into things like Sweet Valley, Point Horror. And then I think, like a lot of bookstagrammers and a lot of us, I seem to go from Point Horror then to Stephen King. And Stephen King really stands out for me, because I remember reading my first Stephen King book and loving it, obviously. And I also remember then being handed books by family. My mother actually, and she's passed away now. She actually died in college, but my mother put The Colour Purple into my hands when I was 14, and she said to me, this is a book that is so unlike your experience, and I want you to read it and then, come back and talk to me about it. So I think I was either 14 or 15. And that was the first time that I read a book by someone who wasn't, a preppy white teenager, I think. And it was obviously my first book by a Black woman. And it just had this huge effect on me, because I didn't know any experience outside of my own. I was this young white teenager living in Limerick in Ireland. I didn't know anything about racism when I was 14. I didn't know anything about the experiences of Black women. And that was the first book I read, and probably, started me on a course then to looking at books that has now led to kind of the banned books group. So that one definitely stands out, The Colour Purple. All of Stephen King, Flowers in the Attic. So Virginia Andrews, my mother actually gave me a copy of Flowers in the Attic. She was really liberal in terms of what she read and what she allowed us to read. Maeve Binchy would have been introduced to me by my mother and her sisters, and probably Marion Keyes as well. When I got into my kind of later teenage years, that would be a standout for me as well. So those just off the top of my head, probably.
That's a fair list for off the top of your head.
Yeah.
It's lovely though to see that your mother was so forward thinking in terms of reading, and was, encouraging you to look critically at the world around you, especially at such a young age. I think that that's something that a lot of people don't actually start to experience until they're possibly in college themselves. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. And Rebecca, you've read Stephen King very young as well. I actually have just read my first Stephen King this year.
It's obviously a very different experience reading him as an adult with so much life experience. Like, I wonder how different we would be if we were only reading him for the first time at that age,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've just read the On Writing book. I haven't read any of his fictional works. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and advice on Stephen King, Elaine.
Oh yeah, the book club actually came out of the banned books one. So we had probably read, the banned books one is running for about 16 or 17 months now, and the Stephen King one is a year old this month. And when we were picking our banned book for whatever month it was, we were about 5 months in. I had put Carrie up as one of the suggestions, because a lot of Stephen King's books are actually banned. So I put up Carrie as a suggestion, and it got an overwhelming, response in terms of votes. And we decided to read that. And we loved Carrie so much that we were chatting in the group, and we said, wouldn't it be amazing to go back and read like all of the Stephen King books, or read them in a certain type of order, or, just to try and understand him more. And it literally grew from there. And I had said, would people be okay if I just went and set it up? And then most of the people that are in the banned books one are in the Stephen King one. But I have to say, it's a really great bunch, because some people have read loads of Stephen King and are rereading now, as adults. There's some like yourself, Claire, who had never read Stephen King and came into it really blind. And those reactions are actually always very interesting. but we kind of took it. We don't have a methodology to it. We kind of said Carrie was, technically our first book because it grew out of that read. Carrie was actually the first book that Stephen King published as well. It wasn't the first one he wrote, but it was the first one he published. And after that, we kind of went for his most popular, standalones without going into a series first. So we read things like It, we read Misery, The Shining, and we've just finished The Green Mile. Now we've read 12 books, we've read it. I won't list all 12 of them, but we've just finished The Green Mile, and then we're reading Salem's Lot for October. So, but it's just a brilliant group. The banter is top notch. I mean, you have to laugh at some of Stephen King's work as well. I mean, his earlier books, he can be quite a misogynist. The way he writes women is questionable sometimes. How he describes sex, his sex scenes are laughable at best. I mean, it really is a funny group as well. And we are starting to see how he has evolved as a writer, and we're starting to compare kind of, his older works with his newer, and you're trying to understand okay, we can definitely see his wife's influence there because, he's writing women a little bit better now. Maybe she's gotten involved and kind of coached him a little bit. So the discussions out of it are actually brilliant. It's a really interesting group to be a part of.
Do you ever get bored of reading something by the same author every single month?
I don't, to be honest, because I think what has emerged from the group is that he is an incredible storyteller, and every story he tells is so different. So what I try to do is I try to change it up so that if we're reading a really long one, like It is over 1,100 pages. So when we read It, we kind of read a short one after that, or we read one of his novellas. And the other thing we try do is we try switch up the genre, I suppose. So there's some of his stuff that is just absolutely terrifying. There's other ones then that are more thrillers. So I would class Misery as more of a thriller. Carrie is more of a thriller. The Green Mile then is something completely different again. And we read Dolores Claiborne actually the month before last. And, Dolores Claiborne, when I was growing up, I thought that was like a courtroom drama. I don't know what made me think that. I know there is a scene in it where, she's on trial for killing her husband. And I thought, oh yeah, that one's a courtroom drama. That would be a nice one to read. And then you go back and read it, and it is absolutely terrifying, as an adult, because the scariest thing in the world are people and what people are capable of. But we try to change it up that we will read a really scary horror one month, and then we'll switch it up and read, his most gentle novella. Now, when I say gentle, that could be the one that Stand By Me is based on, The Body, or it could be, like I said, The Green Mile. But The Green Mile in itself is still terrifying, as an adult reading it, when you get, I suppose, when you think about the themes in it that don't resonate with you when you're a child. Like when you're a child, you're just looking for the gore, the sex, the absolute, the stuff that people are talking about, the real. It's the same when you're looking at Sweet Valley High. You're looking for the book where kind of Elizabeth loses her virginity to Todd, whereas as an adult, you're taking it in from a much, more different perspective. And they are terrifying. All of them are terrifying, but we try to switch it up in terms of how terrifying they are.
I think I'm a bit afraid to read Stephen King, to be honest.
In fairness, he has the benefit, as Elaine said, of being a genuinely good storyteller. Some other horror books are they're gory, they are horrific to read, but they just don't have the same touch, narrative wise, as what he does. And then the more of him you read, the more little references you see kind of to different characters from different stories, and pretty much everything is set in Maine. And it's the little threads that are kind of woven through all the different ones. And the group is great because other people can point out stuff that maybe you didn't notice, or can maybe give a bit of kind of context or background to something that you wouldn't have been aware of. So it's lovely to have kind of the collective rereads then as well, or reads for the first time. For that reason,
there's some people who are really good at that. There's some people that are really good at spotting the Easter eggs. Sharon Levy, again, she's fantastic at that. And it's always Sharon in the group that, comes up with the connections, and I'm just amazed by them. And I suppose the other thing is, it's like Elizabeth Strout. that he creates this kind of other universe, and the characters overlap, or someone in one book might mention that someone who had a pet dog, and then there's suddenly a book about a dog called Cujo, and we're all absolutely terrified reading it. But he's definitely an author that's not afraid to push boundaries, and I think that's really refreshing about him as well. Now, I know he was writing in the 70s, 80s and 90s, when some of his most controversial books came out. But he is that author that isn't afraid, to murder a child, or to feature the murder of a child. We all know that controversial scene in it where, there's a child orgy at the end of the book, which always comes up in discussion forums. But I think that's kind of interesting as well, when you're rereading it as an adult, that you're actually looking back on the book going, oh my God, he went there. Like, he actually did that thing. And I don't think there's anybody doing that nowadays. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so fun to go back and read them, Well,
I'm not sure if we've convinced Claire now to read him after talking about
poor Claire.
You have. I just think that he seems like an author. So I've read On Writing, and it all sounds like very intriguing. I think that he's a brave man for the topics that he has covered.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like, would I sleep after reading some of his books? And I guess he's fantastic. He did say in that book as well that a lot of his work is very funny. He says that, like, The Green Mile, that he thought that was a very funny book.
Yeah, I think.
And I have watched The Green Mile. Is it kind of full of humour when you read it? Because I don't think the movie was.
I think no, and actually I just rewatched the movie after I finished the book. I rewatched it with my husband, and we were both, hopefully he doesn't listen to this and like I'm, slating him publicly, but we both cried at the end of it. Like, we were both like visibly very emotional. Now, I was more of a guffaw and he was just a sniffle. But it's very sad. But the book is very funny. The prisoners are very funny. So the antics of the prisoners are very, very funny. I thought, at least, but maybe, my sense of humour now might be different to others. But he does strike me as someone that has a very dry sense of humour. So, like, I do get a lot of laughs out of his book. But I think if you're scared of Stephen King, and for anyone out there, I suppose, that is scared of Stephen King, like, a very good tip is just to start with the ones that kind of are thrillers. So Misery is definitely one, I think, Rebecca, like, isn't it? And it's more of a thriller than a horror. And absolutely, I mean, her whole psyche and, the person Annie Wilkes is, she is terrifying as a person. But I suppose what plays out in the narrative isn't as terrifying as something as, say, It. Like, I wouldn't be going straight into It now, Claire, and launching yourself into, as your first read. But definitely Misery or Dolores Claiborne, they still deal with very harrowing topics, but they're not pure horror. Like, they're more thrillers.
They're more tense than horrific, like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will read one of his books before the end of the year. That's my goal now for myself. There you go. Right.
And you obviously are kind of the leader of the Banned Books book club as well, as we've mentioned, which is a fantastic, initiative in general. And I think people are always surprised by the suggestions in that, because people are always surprised at what books have been banned and for what reasons. But what would be, we'll say, your favourite read, or, a very memorable read that you've done as part of that?
I think The Colour Purple always stands out for me because it's the first one that I read that kind of put me down, that path. And that's important to say, that I probably, I haven't had a banned books group for very long or anything, and I've never been part of a banned books book club outside of Bookstagram. But from that time that my mother gave me The Colour Purple, she did tell me that it was banned. Now, obviously, it wasn't banned in Ireland, right? So book banning is a much bigger thing in the States. But she told me that it had been banned in America, where it had been published. And that made me really curious, because I am that type of person where if you say to me, I mean, growing up when my parents said to me, you're not allowed to watch The Exorcist. The first thing I wanted to do was watch The Exorcist, right? So that's just the type of person I am. And I guess when she gave me that book and she said to me, this is banned in the States, my first question was, well, why? What is in this book that they don't want people to read about? And I suppose what it did then was it kind of woke me up to this whole other experience that was so far outside of the life I was living. So the experience of being a Black woman in America, this kind of double discrimination where not only are you hard done by because you're a woman, but also that you are living this really tough life, faced with racism and prejudice because you are Black as well. And after that, I started reading loads of books by Black women. So I think those are the books that stand out for me. And I like to read something that is completely different from my own experience. And when I went to college, part of my degree, I did some English literature courses or English literature modules. And we never looked at, now I'm going back to kind of the early mid-noughties, and we never looked at books by Black women until I did a module in science fiction, and we read Octavia Butler's Kindred, which is a fantastic book, but we weren't reading it because it was written by a Black woman who, was talking about slavery. We were reading it because we were in a science fiction class and we were all fascinated with time travel. But I was very interested in the story of her, the main character. And then I was lucky enough in college to go on Erasmus. So I studied for a semester abroad in Greece, and there was this fantastic lecturer in the college that I studied at. And he was teaching a module that was just called Black Women Writers. And in that class, as well as reading kind of Alice Walker, Octavia Butler, we read Maya Angelou. And then I was introduced to this fantastic author called Gloria Naylor. Now, we still haven't read any of her books for banned books, but she is on the list. And I think because of all those experiences, like I ended up doing my master's thesis on Black women writers. And I never would have done that had it not been for, my mother giving me The Colour Purple when I was 14. So when it comes to the banned books group, I will always favour, I think, the books by Black women, because that's where it started for me. And that was actually a really popular one. The Colour Purple was really popular in our banned books group. A lot of people were really moved by that book. And I think as well, the classics are always really popular. So, people who assumed that they didn't want to read To Kill a Mockingbird or Catcher in the Rye because it's a classic, and, you think either they're overrated or you might have read them in school and you think you've understood it. But when you go back to read those books as an adult, like every time I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I get something different from it. Every time I read Catcher in the Rye, I get something different from it. So those ones have been really popular as well. I'm trying to think, The Outsiders recently actually was a big one. I think a lot of us assumed we'd cover The Outsiders in school. And when we read it a few months ago, everybody loved it, So like for me, it's definitely an author that has a completely different life experience to myself. And I think, speaking for the group, certainly those books, and also, the revisited classics, I suppose, are very popular ones.
And can I ask, so obviously, as you said, in America, book banning is a much bigger thing than it would be here. Have you had any interest from any American audience based on the whole, is it a book club or a buddy read? What terms you...
It kind of started as buddy reads and now it's kind of morphed into a book club. But no, to be honest, I don't think I have much readership from America really on my Bookstagram page. I used to have a lot, but now that I've started more, the way like at the start everybody was using like hashtag Bookstagram, and I think the numbers of Bookstagrammers was smaller and the reach was wider. But now I think it's really narrowed down, and I think whatever way the algorithm works or whatever hashtags we're using to kind of just, be our own community, I think that, I don't have as much of a reach as I used to have. Of the followers that do follow me from the States or even from Canada, a lot of them will get in touch with me and say, they'll talk about their specific school districts. And they will share their experiences that when they were in school, that there were certain books that they were not allowed to read that were banned from the curriculum. I think a lot of them are, they'd be called challenge books instead of banned, that they're challenged by, a parents' council or a school board, or even where you have, some people have got in touch with me and spoken about, where there's private Catholic schools in the United States and where the clergy dictate what can and can't be prescribed to students. And that's what would have happened in Ireland. So book banning in Ireland, when my mother was reading when she was younger, it would have been the Catholic Church that frowned on books. So I know, Edna O'Brien, who passed away this year, and her trilogy, The Country Girls, like it was the Catholic Church that didn't want that series of books written, and it was them who had banned it. So I suppose it varies country to country depending on who is controlling what books are getting into the hands of teenagers. And I mean, we're seeing it now even in libraries, these people that are challenging what books are being put on library shelves, which is just atrocious. I mean, it's disgraceful to see it happening in this day and age.
Like, I think even like both of us are teachers, and I think even the concept of someone telling me like, oh, look, Rebecca, you actually can't teach that book, like that's not appropriate. Like, we would find that so strange.
Yeah.
Like granted, to a certain degree, we have to work off kind of certain lists of books, which obviously have probably been curated for particular reasons. But junior cycle, there's actually a bit of freedom there with what books we can pick at certain times. And like, I would be horrified if I was told, actually, no, sorry, you are not allowed to teach that book for that reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of teachers that follow me. I do speak to a lot of teachers on my page, and I think we're very lucky in Ireland that teachers do have a certain amount of freedom in what they can prescribe, and what is on the prescribed reading list that teachers can select from is pretty liberal. That we do have topics there being covered that absolutely would not float in American school systems, and it's really upsetting to see, because I know with my children, like my mother, I want my children to read about everything. Because I think that's the only way people can actually learn understanding and empathy, is if they're reading about these subjects. And, keeping these topics away from children and teenagers is actually having the opposite effect, in that it's making them seek them out more, but it's making them feel like their experiences aren't valid. And it's just having such a negative effect on people, especially young people. And I look at it. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but the film All of Us Strangers, and I promise you I'm not bringing it up now just because Andrew Scott is in it and Paul Mescal. But I suppose if anybody listening hasn't seen the film, this isn't really a spoiler, because I think a lot of people know what the film is about. But when I came out of that film is about so many different things. But when I came out of it, straight away it struck me as a kind of an analogy for what banned books are doing. But if you take Andrew Scott's character in that film, he is somebody that's absolutely struggling with the grief of losing his parents, but he's also struggling with his sexuality, as a gay man. And, in whatever age he is in the film, even into his 30s, whatever age he is, he's still struggling with being exactly who he wants to be. And if you look at it, that at the point where he lost his parents, that was, his formative years, I suppose, his coming of age. And when he was just starting to realise that, starting to question his sexuality, he lost the two people in his life that could have given him validation for who he was. And I think it's a really good analogy, because if you don't allow people to read about their experiences, even if they're getting support and understanding from home, books are such an important place to find, shared experiences about identity. And if you take that away from people and they don't get that validation at a key time in their life when they need it, it can absolutely have a detrimental effect on them as they grow older. And that's what you see with Andrew Scott. And like I said, it's a film about a bunch of different things, but that's what really struck me, I think, as the best comparison that I could make. And, I don't want to bring up my kids, certainly, in a world where there are things that they are told that they can't read. I mean, if they're like me, they'll go after them and read them anyway. But it's so important, for them to read widely and, to, I suppose, understand other people's experiences, understand experiences that are different from their own. Otherwise, what are we doing? Like, we're not learning anything,
Yeah, you're dead right.
Funnily, my 8-year-old was doing his homework earlier and he hates writing. And his complaint was, spending all this time writing is taking away time that I could be reading. And I was like, well, you have to practice your writing too, because the people who wrote these books had to write them for you to read them. So writing is really important as well. But he's like, they could type them. And I was like, well, you still need to write. But like his issue was, I could be reading. I could be reading right now,
Yeah.
and I'm doing something that I don't want to be doing, but I could be doing that.
Yeah. He is smart. But he makes a very good point, and actually so do you, Rebecca, because like when you're looking at banned books, you have to look at it from multiple perspectives. Like you have to think about the writers and the authors as well, that, you know, own voice authors are so important, because if you are reading about an experience, if you're reading about the experience of being a Black woman in America during slavery, just because we brought it up already, it is best to read about that from a person who has lived that experience or has ancestors who have lived that experience. And, you know, the thing is, I suppose, for the authors, like even getting something on a page is really important for an author. Like if you continue to ban books or challenge books or, you know, take books out of readers' hands, you're also saying that author's voice isn't important and that their experience isn't important, that, you know, you're essentially erasing their identity, I suppose, and telling them that their story doesn't matter. So it's as important for the author of the book as it is for us reading it, you know?
That's a great point, actually. I never thought about it that way.
It is, and that kind of links back to something that we were talking about before, about, you know, how they're rephrasing certain words and sentences in some books by Roald Dahl, and Enid Blyton names are being replaced and everything. It's just interesting to see how retrospectively there's a bit of censorship going on, because at the time it wasn't something that was as warranted, I suppose. Am I making sense? It's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't agree with it. I mean, I think it's you know, pretty simple, really. I think, you know, using any kind of terminology now that's, you know, not politically correct, of course I don't agree with, you know, that terminology being used nowadays either. But likewise, I don't agree that history should be erased. I think it's there because it was written in a certain time and place, and I think it's there so we can learn from it. And I think unless it is there for us to learn from, then, you know, we're going to repeat the past. Eventually we're going to repeat history, so it should be preserved as a learning tool, and I fully stand by that. And I know, like for Roald Dahl even, I noticed it only recently because my 8-year-old has just started an activity at school called Accelerated Reader, which is fantastic. I'm actually very excited about it. I nearly want to be taking it over and doing it myself. But he reads a book, he does a quiz on the book, and then it records how many words he's read in that book. But there's different editions of each book on the actual system, because, you know, there's old Roald Dahl and there's new Roald Dahl, and we're reading all old Roald Dahl. So yeah, so we're reading like the old Roald Dahl with all of the original words, and then some of the quizzes have different questions based on the words that have been used. So that's where I'm kind of spotting it now. But, you know, my kids ask me when we come across words like that, you know, what does that word mean? And, you know, as a parent, and absolutely, you know, I don't have a blueprint here, and, you know, struggle on the daily with being a parent, believe me. But for me, if, you know, I like to explain to my child that, yes, that word was used, this is what it means, and this is why we don't use it anymore. And I think that's what we should be working towards, you know, rather than erasing the words of authors, you know.
Yeah.
It's a learning opportunity and a teaching opportunity that's been taken out of people's hands. Yeah.
Yeah. And have you, we'll say, just in terms of like, either probably not to do with Stephen King book now, but probably maybe the banned books, or just in general, have you ever kind of received any negativity on Instagram for any of the stuff you do?
Yeah, I mean, you will get the odd person that, you know, might message who's not actually part of the group but will be following, because I'll always post what we're reading, because you will get people that will dip in and out for specific books. And you will always get, you know, people that kind of dip in and say, you know, well, there's a reason this book is banned, and, you know, it shouldn't be on school prescribed lists, and, you know, there's a reason for it. And normally it's around kind of profanity or behavior by teenagers, in terms of, you know, like The Outsiders, I suppose, has that kind of, you know, gang notion to it that, you know, some people would probably think we shouldn't be reading about. I think as well, I do get messages about queer literature that I read, or that I would kind of promote as part of banned books. to be honest, you know, I'd always respond to anyone who writes to me, but you know, there's a certain amount of tolerance that I have for opinions like that as well. Like I've always said that my Bookstagram is a very inclusive space. There's nothing we don't read. But you do get those messages. But look, I get messages as well from people saying, you know, you have to stop sharing Harry Styles. Like we're sick of looking at him. So, you know, and then I know. And then there is somebody who contacts me on Fridays, not every Friday, but will tell me that Tom Hiddleston looks like a predator, like a sexual predator, and that I shouldn't be sharing, you know, his dancing. So like it is, look, you take it all with a grain of salt, but absolutely I do not think, I know you've said like that, you know, I have a big following, and I do genuinely mean this. I do not care. I care about my followers, but I don't care about the number of followers, if that makes sense. Like I regularly go through and call people. Like I don't really pay attention to the number of followers because that's not why I'm in it. And I regularly do go through and call out people. So like if someone's if I think they're a bot, I'll get rid of them. If any topless men follow me, I get rid of them. I know that's actually quite, that's quite not ironic, but it's, you know, I do share
topless men.
You know, I do. Let's just call a spade. But if you are a strange topless man following me and you have 6 posts on your profile and there's 6 of you with no top on, like, come on, you're not here for the books, lad. So you're going, you know, you're going. So I do call it, and I also like to be in touch. Like I know I'm not chatting to every single follower, but like I do genuinely chat to so many people in my DMs every single day, and there's the same people that will contact me every Friday and they'll say, "Happy Friday, Elaine." And, you know, there's people who I know are watching Feel Good Friday with their kids. There's one woman who I've become really close to, and, you know, she has an autistic son and she watches Feel Good Friday with him every Friday. So that's the things I love about it. So look, if you get the odd crank that comes in and says, you shouldn't be reading that book, or you shouldn't be promoting that book, or, you know, stop with the Harry Styles, look, sure, it's worth it. You just shrug those things off, you know. They don't really bother me, to be honest.
Never, ever, ever stop with the Harry Styles, Elaine. We will support you till our dying breath with the topless Harry Styles and the gyration and everything.
Yeah. He's the definition of joy. Like Harry Styles is one of the happiest people on the planet, and all he wants to do is spread love. And look, I've been to Love on Tour. My sister took me for my 40th birthday, and it was, and bear in mind now, I'm married and I've had 2 children. It was still one of the best days of my life. Like it just the love in the arena, and we saw him in Wembley, like the absolute love that man is capable of evoking and spreading. Like he's just a marvel, and everybody on this planet should be grateful for him. He's amazing.
He is. I actually saw him when he was in One Direction. Myself and one of my friends went. I loved One Direction, and he really stood out of the whole lot of them. He was so grateful and gracious after every performance, and I was like, I turned to my friend and I was like, he is going to go very far, regardless of the rest of them, because I was like, look at the gratitude that he is showing. He just practices everything that you would be trying to practice to be a happier human being. Like he's just, he's a great boy, isn't he?
He's
Harry.
He's an icon. He's amazing, and he just seems so sound, and we love a sounder. Like we do. We just, us Irish people, we love a sounder.
Him now and those 2 Kiwi lads
to come vibe with me, guys.
Around to like Celine Dion and stuff.
Yeah,
they are just fabulous as well.
Yeah. Oh, come here. I love it, and I suppose that's something really important to say. You know, when you talk about Bookstagram, and you know, having followers or whatever, like the followers, genuinely, the number doesn't mean anything to me, because my Bookstagram is a selfish endeavor as well. Like my Bookstagram, if I could describe it, is just a brain fart of whatever's happening in my head on any one day, and it could be that I'm, you know, just spilling out these thoughts about a book. It could be that I'm talking about a TV series. Like I just finished The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and what a car crash TV. So I was just talking about that. Like anything that's in my head just gets spilled onto the page. And it's the same with Feel Good Friday. It's because I need the boost. Like, who doesn't need a boost on a Friday morning? Like, I mean, Jesus, I work full time. I have 2 small kids. Like, life is just busy. I was just saying to Rebecca, like, not myself and my husband, we both help out with hurling, camogie. You know, he's involved in athletics. Like, we're ships passing all the time, and everything you see on my Bookstagram is something to make me happy as well. Like, it is a very selfish endeavor. Like, I don't for 1 minute think that I'm doing some amazing service to the community. You know, I'd never be that cocky, because that's not ever what I wanted it to be. It really is just a space for me, and anything I'm putting on there is what I like too. So it kind of is a little bit selfish, but look, I love it. So
that's the way to do it. You have to have the passion behind it, you know, something just for you. And I think as moms as well, it's a big thing that you have that space for something just for yourself, especially when you are so involved in extracurriculars for the kids and stuff. It's just nice to have, this is my me time.
Yeah. And the fact you have intentionally or otherwise created a space for other people, like what your mom gave you, you know, in terms of, these are these books, I think we should read them. I think we should talk about them afterwards, and we'll all learn something from it. Like, that you've created that space for people is fabulous.
Yeah, I do. I do like it. I'm very lucky. You know, I'm very lucky that my mother was a reader, and I'm very lucky that she was very open with us. Now, look, I'm presenting this picture of her that she was super, super progressive and liberal. But, like, you know, bear in mind, I wasn't allowed to watch Dirty Dancing until I was 17. Now, that was really embarrassing, because I was going to sleepovers, and when that film was put on in the sitting room, I had to excuse myself and say, oh, I'm not allowed to watch it. I wasn't allowed to watch Home and Away till I was 16, because there was a teenage pregnancy in it. So, you know, in one hand, she's handing me a book and being like, you know, read about racism. And, you know, she's handing me books where there might have been like a theme of sexual abuse. But then she's like, no, you're not watching Home and Away because there's a teenage pregnancy in it and you could be, you know, influenced. So, you know, she kind of, she gave and she took, let's just say. But I was very lucky. I was very lucky, I suppose, that reading was encouraged at home. And, you know, even with my pocket money every week, if I, you know, spent it on a book and I finished that book in 2 days, you know, she'd get me another book, because she always, you know, really got behind reading and knew how important it was. And, you know, as I said, read herself, passed me books. My aunts were the same. Like, even, I remember one of my aunts handing me like a very early biography of Diana, and reading about, you know, Diana's experience of her marriage with Charles. And, you know, like, there was so many themes in that, like bulimia even, and I was very young at the time. But the rule was that you read it, and then if you had questions, you asked her about them, you know, rather than kind of going in and spreading, you know, these kind of ideas around your classroom, like go in and tell everybody else's child, you know, what was happening in these books that you were reading. So, you know, it was very fair, I think, the way she did it. And certainly, you know, something I will be doing with my own kids.
That's lovely to have that
Maybe
kind of...
not Stephen King quite yet, though.
Yeah.
God, no. Look, we're still on the PM readers for now. We've just kind of moved on to early Rodale and Dogman, so we'll stick with those for a while. But yeah, we have this, and I actually put this on Bookstagram before, and people did really like it. But we have these, you know, these pencils that write on glass.
Oh yeah.
And what we do is, if we come across a word that the kids don't know or that they want to, you know, ask about, we always put the word up on the patio door. So we write it up on the patio door in kind of these glass pencils, and it stays up there for the week. And, you know, they get to look up what the word means. They get to ask Google about it. They get to kind of do a little bit of research about it. So it's a really good way of, like, helping them to understand the word, but also they're doing a little research project without knowing it. And, you know, good for it being a sight word as well, for learning to see what the word looks like and how to spell it. So yeah, there's a little parenting tip. I don't have many of them, I'll tell you, but that's one anyway.
There you go. Now there's active learning.
Yeah, there's another thing I invented. I think I invented it. I'm sure loads of other people are doing it, and it's nothing new, but sure, look.
Well, we're not.
We give you the credit for it.
Yeah. So, Elaine, is there any books that you think everybody should read?
There is actually, and you know what is common about the books I think a lot of people should read is that most of them are memoirs. I love reading memoirs. I think, having that, like, I love reading about people's lives and I love a good story, but I think memoirs give such a good insight into how people think and how they feel, and, reading kind of firsthand about their experiences, I find fascinating. So I think Know My Name by Chanel Miller, I think that's one everybody should read, and most people will know what that book is. And I know other people you've interviewed have mentioned that book as well. I think as well there's 2 books about education and about breaking free from toxic cycles that I absolutely loved. So one of them came out this year. It's Poor by Kaitriona Sullivan, which I loved. And the other one is Educated by Tara Westover, which again is just a fascinating book. A controversial one, I suppose, in terms of recommending it, because it does absolutely break hearts. But A Heart That Works by Delaney, I think, is a fantastic book, not just for anybody who's experiencing that very specific type of grief, but anyone who's a parent, anyone who is married. I think, I took so much from that book, but one of the things that stood out to me as well was the dynamic between him and his wife and how they handled kind of life situations. I thought that was fantastic. And also, Wild by Cheryl Strayed.
Yes, I love Wild by Cheryl Strayed.
It's such a good book. And, I mean, you ask what it's about, and it's about this woman that hikes the Pacific Crest Trail. But I can't tell you the comfort that I got from reading that book, because I like that, I'm someone that goes after books that I'm told I shouldn't read, but also I get a lot of comfort from shared experience. So when I lost my mother, when my mother died, I sought out every book I could find about a young woman who had lost her mother to cancer. And I thought that book was incredible. And I'm not just recommending it for people, who've lost someone to cancer, but for anybody who's dealing with grief and navigating life at that time in your life where you're becoming an adult and you're kind of going on that next stage of your life. It's brilliant. And I kind of learned a bit about the outdoors as well. So I love that. And then fiction, because not everybody loves memoirs, but To Kill a Mockingbird, I think, is just a fantastic book. I recommend it to everybody. And people are quick to kind of shrug it off because they think, oh, it's a classic, I read it in school, or it was on the junior search or whatever. But I think in terms of, that liberal perspective versus kind of injustice and prejudice, and it was one of my earliest introductions to racism as well. And I think it's an incredible book. And I suppose lastly, in terms of favourite authors that I think people should read, probably Elizabeth Strout, I think, is fantastic. Claire Keegan and Donal Ryan. I think the 3 of them all write about humanness and the human condition really well. And I've definitely seen myself in a lot of their characters, for sure. I think they're incredible writers, because not everybody loves a memoir,
Yeah. I would 100% agree with Claire Keegan and Donal Ryan. And the only reason I'm not agreeing with Elizabeth Strout is because I have not read anything by her.
Yeah, she's incredible. Like Adele Reeds did a fantastic buddy read series of the Elizabeth Strout books, and I took part in a good few of those. But Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout is one of my favourite books of all time. I absolutely love it. And just that ability to kind of describe human emotion, I think, is very unique to her. Claire Keegan is the same, actually. And Donal Ryan, I just read his new book, Heart Be at Peace, the follow-up to The Spinning Heart, and I just think he's fantastic at writing Irish people and writing, rural Irish community. He's a marvel. He actually teaches in UL. I still haven't walked past him in the corridors because we're in different buildings, but it will happen someday.
Get moved.
I know, but I'm sure I'll just be that fangirl, that book nerd fangirl. And like, he's so normal, he teaches creative writing in UL, so sure he's there all the time. But I always read his acknowledgements at the back of his books, and I see people thanked who also work in UL, and I'm like, oh my God, like if I worked near, or, I might be in that list. So
just Elaine sliding, onto this corridor. I love it. So there are some of your favourite authors. Could you share with us your favourite reads from this year?
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? I will say this year has been a fantastic year for books so far. Like, it's one of the best years I think that I've ever had in reading. And I just think there's more and more books coming out all the time, but books are just like getting better and better. Like, this year was fantastic for Irish authors as well. But the first one, and I don't know when this episode is going live, but the one that you've picked this month, All the Colours of the Dark, is just like a fantastic book. And I don't think, it doesn't matter what comes out the rest of this year, in the next 3 months, I don't think a book is going to top that for me. It was just brilliant. And like, I've been raving, I love Chris Whitaker. And when when We Begin at the End came out, I read it like very late December, and I had my favourite books of 2001 picked, I think. And then I read that in late December, and I had to just overhaul the whole list and be like, wait, no, there's a new favourite. And he came in very late into that list. But All the Colours of the Dark was fantastic. I did a body read of that with Marianne, so Books with Doots. So just the two of us read it together, because we're both obsessed with Chris Whitaker, and we were like in our DMs every time one of us finished a chapter. One of us was crying, one of us was laughing, like one of us was screaming, and we both had other commitments on, and neither of us wanted to go and leave the house, and leave the book. And that's such a good sign when you can't like tear yourself away from the book. So definitely it's the top of my list, and I'd say it'll be top of Marianne's as well. So Donal Ryan's book, definitely. And I reread The Spinning Heart as well, so I would definitely recommend both of those. Margot's Got Money Troubles was a fantastic read as well. So that one is by Ruthie Thorpe, and it's about a young girl who gets pregnant either in her late teens or very early 20s. And because of how the baby comes about, she's going to be a single parent. It's as a result of an affair. That's not a spoiler. It's in the blurb. But to make ends meet and support her new baby, she starts an OnlyFans account. And it's just such an interesting concept. The writing is fantastic, but the protagonist, like the lead character, is one of the best protagonists I've ever read about. She's absolutely fantastic. And it's narrated by one of the Fannings, so not Dakota Fanning. Is it Elle, her sister Elle Fanning?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So she does the audiobook, and it's just fantastic. I would definitely recommend that. And the other one that I raved about this year was I Love You, I Love You, I Love You by Laura Dockrell, or I Love You by 3, as people are calling it. But that was fantastic. That really stands out for me as well. And I love a story, like I love a coming of age story that's written for adults. And I thought that whole idea of having a lifelong friend who potentially could be a love interest and how it plays out over a lifetime, I love that. And then, in terms of the Irish one, loved Hagstone by Sinead Gleeson. When We Were Silent by Fiona McPhillips.
Yes,
I really loved that one.
brilliant.
Yeah, that was incredible, about the sexual abuse scandal in swimming. Loved that. How to Build a Boat by Elaine Feeney.
Yeah.
I only read that this year. I know it came out last year, but I love that. What else did I read this year? The Amendments by Niamh Mulvey, her debut novel. I thought that was fantastic. And the new Graham Norton. I just finished that and I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. It's one of his best. I was actually invited to his event. So, because I live in rural Clare, I don't go to any like book launches and stuff, like unless they happen locally. Because I don't go up to Dublin a lot. But Kenny's bookshop, which is my favourite bookshop in the country, like they're fantastic. They invited me up to his event. So they ran an event with Graham Norton where Pauline McGlynn interviewed him. And I got to go, and I swear to God, like I had complete imposter syndrome, because I was like, why are they inviting me to this? Like I can't be going to this. And from the minute I was leaving the house, like I was texting my friend Graw, who actually works in Kenny's, and I was like, I don't think I can go. Like I just have imposter syndrome. Like why am I going to this? And she said to me, well, I think people are going to be more obsessed with Graham Norton than whether you'll be there or not. So maybe you should just go. So she completely brought me back down to earth. But I went, and it was my first proper like Bookstagram event. And I'm doing this now 5 years, but it was I'm so like, I think I'm as annoying to other people as I am to myself. So like, I couldn't believe that I was going to this thing and couldn't believe I'd been invited, but I loved it. And he was fabulous. And Pauline McGlynn was fabulous. And he just came across as exactly as he comes across on TV. Like, he's just really warm and hyper and just funny and lovely. So I think that's most of them. Sandwich by Catherine Newman actually was really good. So, you know, Catherine Newman wrote We All Want Impossible Things, which was another incredible book about losing someone to cancer. But her new book, Sandwich, which is set in Cape Cod, I finished that a couple of weeks ago and I love that. I think that's most of them.
How many books have you read this year, Elaine?
I only know this because I checked it before I came on, you know, this interview. I've read 145 so far.
Oh my God.
Which is, now that is a lot more than I would normally read. I think I read 187 last year in the year. But I did have surgery this year and I was kind of out of action for a few weeks, so I'd loads of time to read. And look, I do spend a lot of time with the book in my ear. I'm someone that doesn't like to be on my own with my own thoughts. So there's always an audiobook playing somewhere, whether I'm doing housework or I'm in the car or I'm just pottering or I'm out for a walk or a run or whatever. There's an audiobook in my ear. So I get through a lot of books on audio.
They're the way to go. Like I started a book there on Saturday night and I finished it this morning. And if I were to read that purely as a paperback, it would take me a good 2 weeks, I'd say, given the constricted time schedule that I've got going on. You know, it's a great way to get into books.
It is, and some of them are just better. Like if you take like Daisy Jones and the Six, for example, you know, that's really kind of like an oral history of a band, and a lot of people pick that book up and put it down again and said, I can't read it. Like, it's switching perspective so much. It's like reading an interview, but if you listen to it on audio, it completely comes alive. So there are books that are just better on audio. I Love You, I Love You, I Love You is an example because it's narrated by Laura Dockrell, who is the author, and you know, the accent, just, it's her reliving her childhood experiences because she wrote the book about her husband. So it's actually about her and her husband's lifelong journey from becoming child. Yeah. So there's an excellent article. I can't remember where the article was now. It's I don't know whether it's The Guardian, but anyway, it's a UK newspaper did a piece on it, and it's actually the story of her and her husband being childhood friends. And he's in a band. I cannot for the life of me think of the UK band that he's in now, a very well-known band, because the character in it is in a band as well. But it's her own story. You know, I suppose a fictionalized account to an extent, but it's her and her husband's love story, and it makes it even more amazing when you read it. But the audio is fantastic, and the same with Margot's Got Money Troubles. You know, when you know the narrator as well, I think it makes a huge difference.
I've never heard of Margot's Got Money Troubles. It sounds really interesting.
Oh, it's so good. And it's not one you would pick up. And I've lent it to people and I've said, you know, read it. Don't let the OnlyFans thing put you off. Because, you know, I think I handed it to my husband's aunt there a few weeks ago. And, you know, she's in like her early 60s. And I was like, do you know what OnlyFans is? Like before I handed it to her, and had to explain to her and her husband that, well, it's kind of like this, you know, site for sex work. And then my husband was beside me going, no, it's not just for that. And then we ended up getting into this, you know, heated discussion where he said, you know, if you just wanted to read books on OnlyFans, you could probably make money. And I was like, what? I was like, narrate books on OnlyFans, like read books on OnlyFans with the video turned on. You think I'd make money? So we got into this huge discussion about what OnlyFans is. But I would say don't.
Would you make money off that?
Samir, if you could, wouldn't I be on it the whole time? I'd quit my day job, as they say. I'd be gone from UL in a flash if I could read books for a living. I'd love to narrate books as well.
Maybe hashtag Bookstagrammers.
I definitely saw someone who is making money from reading books, but they're making money because they're turning the pages with their feet.
Oh,
so it's
I saw that.
Feet at a book.
Yeah, there has to be a dark twist, I think. So you'd have to do it, you know, you'd have to read topless, or, you know, read, like, I know of a person on OnlyFans who games topless, so who sits in front of their Xbox gaming and records themselves, but does it topless. So look, girls, you heard it here. Sure, look, we're inventing it. Like, look at these things we're inventing.
I mean, we could be doing this topless for all people know. If you look at where we're cut off, no one would ever know.
So, but yeah, don't let that put you off. Honestly, it is one of the most refreshing books I've read this year, and it's about loads of things. You know, it goes into her relationship with her father as well. It goes into her relationship with her mother, but also her trying to get an education as well. So trying to continue on her own life while minding an infant. You know, so it's a brilliant book.
It's hard.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've added another 20 books to our TBRs easily.
Oh, sure. Look, that's what I'm here for. That's what I do.
Yeah. Are you ready for your quick fire round?
Oh God, I absolutely did not prepare for this, and I've listened to all of your episodes, right? So like I've listened to every interview you've ever done with anybody, and did I remember the quickfire round? No. So now I'm nervous, but sure, look, we'll give it a go.
Okay, your first one is long chapters or short chapters?
Short chapters.
Annotate a book or keep them pristine?
Oh, pristine. People won't borrow books from me, Claire. Like my neighbour actually just has Hagstone. So Sinead Gleason's book, Hagstone, she borrowed it from me. And I pulled up in the car. She also looks after my kids. She lives just behind me. And I pulled up the other day to collect the kids, and she said, Elaine, that book that you gave me, I don't think that's ever been read. And I was like, no, I read that. And she said, Elaine, it hasn't even been opened. Like the spine isn't even bent. So like I am that person that reads like peeping into the book, you know, where it's barely open and you're just like, you're kind of turning the book to read it rather than you know, spreading the pages. No dog ears, nothing. Sorry,
okay.
No, it has to be perfect.
Fair play to you. Character-driven or plot-driven stories?
Oh, character. I love reading about people.
Fast-paced or slow burn?
Oh, that's hard. I love a slow burn, but I like a thriller as a palate cleanser. Yeah.
Okay. Bookshop or library?
Oh, library. Yeah, 100%.
Do you prefer a cliffhanger ending or do you prefer if things are neatly wrapped up?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I love something sewn up in a neat little package, but if I'm looking for a palate cleanser and it's a thriller, you know, give me a cliffhanger any day. Leave me thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay. Paperbacks that fit in your bag or larger hardcovers for display?
Hardcovers, definitely for my shelves. And sure, if you're not walking around with a book in your hand, how does anyone know you're a reader? You have to show them.
Oh, I love it. Illustrations in books or let your imagination do the work?
Imagination do the work. Definitely.
Multiple point of views or single narrator?
Multiple point of views. I love them.
Okay. Interesting. And your last one, only have 6 months left on Bookstagram or start it all from scratch again?
Oh, Jesus, that's very hard. Oh my God, I dread to think having to like restock it, but I couldn't be without it. So I'd have to restart it. I couldn't be without it. Not now.
Oh, Elaine, thanks so much for coming on. It's been fantastic.
I'm delighted.
The chat. Yeah.
This is the first time I've ever done anything like this. I'm absolutely honoured to be picked. Thank you sincerely for having me on. As I said, it's the first time I've done anything like this and I absolutely love it. And I'm the biggest fan of your podcast. I recommend it to everybody. I just think, you know, I love that you have a book that you can read along with. I love your interviews. And I also love, you know, when you come back for a new season and you'll do the pieces that are just you guys, where you're not interviewing anybody, but you're talking about your book recommendations and, you know, what you've been reading and your thoughts on different things. I love those. I just think you're doing a fantastic job. You're actually providing a fabulous service to the book world. So you should be very proud.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's making me a bit emotional now, Elaine.
Yeah, no, thanks a million. I've loved it, and I it's been great because I grow a little bit in confidence now when I do something like this. So you've helped me a lot too. So thanks a million.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Another Chapter podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share to keep the book conversation going. Thank you to Helen Becerra for the graphics, Mark Neville for the mixing, and to each of our contributors. Music is Make It Work by All Good Folks.
Don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Another Chapter Podcast. We'll see you there.